welcome to Business Reporter's Best of British Business campaign. Not long ago, institutions and companies invested the majority of their capital in physical assets. Today, bricks are being replaced with clicks, office teams with a digitally connected, often global workforce. In the modern post-COVID world, nearly every business is a digital business. IT has arguably become the framework that underpins and holds together any modern organisation. However, according to the Economist Research Unit, many CIOs don't recognise their role's importance to the strategic decisions of their organisation. Well, with us today to discuss the modern-day CIO and how crucial they are to today's business is Paul Butler, Executive Director and CIO at the University of Greenwich, Karen Bates, Deputy CDIO at London Business School, and James Crooks, Chief Information Officer at Durham University. Welcome to you all. James West, just outline for me, if you would, what are the strongest trends that shape IT?
There's one main trend. Everything is digital now. Every organisation, and universities are no different, are now digital organisations. So they have to recognise that, and the CIO has to play a role in responding to that.
For me also too, the trends are, data and cybersecurity. It's something that all institutions, all organisations need to be maturing at.
And also fundamentally, our business is about teaching, learning and research. So understanding what our student and staff experiences and their digital too are is absolutely fundamental to the mission of the university and the job of a CIO.
You've named a few robust trends, but let's take the ideal scenario. What does a fully efficient, powerful IT director actually look like?
Well, the CIO, plain and simple, needs a seat at the table. And when we say table, we mean the C-suite table.
In terms of losing the title of IT director, I think it's one that is synonymous with Wi-Fi, laptops, provisioning of hardware. The CIO is a chief information officer, chief digital information officer.
And if you're not at the table, involved in those conversations at a strategic level, bringing digital into the conversation, then the university is weaker for it, and the IT directorate cannot do its role properly.
So how are universities and companies performing then? Do they get the benefits of a successful digital transformation?
I think there's a polarisation. Some really get it and others don't. Where they don't get it, the CIO lacks influence at that top table, and therefore digital is not in the conversation.
Decisions may not include the right people, and therefore those might be the wrong decisions. For example, let's say a university is spending £50 million on a new building. If you've not got the CIO as part of that conversation, making sure that it is digitally enabled, that the learning environments have got the right technology, the infrastructure is there, it's connected appropriately, then ultimately that building is not going to perform.
And I think it just goes back to the fact that James mentioned earlier about everything is digital. Even something that on the surface doesn't feel like it's got a digital impact probably will.
So you've given me some examples, new buildings, marketing. Where else does a CIO's influence, where else is it felt? Where else should it be felt?
Risk exposure is a really key factor at the moment, whether that's security, information security, cyber security.
Well, those risks around technology are institutional level risks. They're no longer the IT department's risks. And that needs to be recognised across the entire organisation, and really responsibility shared across the organisation for mitigation.
Cybersecurity is everyone's business.
Everyone has a responsibility if they're interacting with technology to understand the implications and the risks involved with what they're doing. And it's the CIO's responsibility to ensure that there's appropriate governance, there is appropriate education, training, maturity across all levels of the organisation, which also includes C-suite colleagues, to ensure that there is good, robust practice in place. And I think institutions across the country, whether they're educational or corporate, can suffer the same. Our institutions are rich in data, but often that data isn't joined up. It's patchy, poor quality. There's a wonderful phrase which is decisions based on poor information can only ever lead to costly mistakes. And that's where a CIO can bring that data strategy as part of the digital strategy to combine the two and ensure that business decisions are being made based on good quality, sound, reliable data. as opposed to a sort of lack of trust of what's being presented in a report.
Before we dive into what the IT Directorate of the future should look like, what are the struggles faced now? James?
The common phrase, I don't do tech, or I'm not tech savvy, we hear that a lot, I think, across our organisations, and it's no longer acceptable to say those sorts of things. It would be like the CIO saying, I don't do finance, or I don't do risk. That isn't acceptable.
One of the key challenges that many institutions are struggling with is skills shortages. And I think that's where it really positions technology as part of a global skills pot. We're not just competing within a higher education remit, we're competing in a global market for global talent in digital technology skills, cyber and data included. There's a recent piece of work which UCISA has been supporting on to look at how we can better support institutions within the country with this challenge. So, we can have all the ambition that we want, but if we can't acquire and retain the right skilled individuals to help us to deliver, then we're in a holding pattern.
Join the dots for me, take me on that journey. What does ultimately that organisational weakness mean for every stakeholder involved?
It means a loss of market share, the loss of competitive edge in an increasingly competitive marketplace.
If we don't get our digital services right, our students have a poorer experience, and that will end up reflecting in the position of the university within the sector.
So what are the principles then of a successful organisation? How can it work well to combine IT with all other departments and the organisation as a whole?
Many universities and organisations need to go through a culture change and understand that IT is no longer just a plug-in.
The CIO needs to be a partner with the rest of the organisation. It really is about partnership.
I would agree. There needs to be trust, empathy, collaboration, and then once that's in place, then you can start working together and that partnership will blossom.
So how do we make that change? Bearing in mind there are some institutions and companies that are already doing this, but if they're not, how do you start making that change? From I don't do tech to I do tech, and I do tech well.
I think the key is finding those advocates, finding those digital change ambassadors in your organisation, but also beyond your organisation. Higher education is unique in that it has a fantastic network and community of practitioners who will work collaboratively across the sector through organisations like UCISA to really share good practice, not just within IT teams and digital teams, but in finance director communities and even vice chancellors and the CEOs of our organisations.
And I think CIOs need to really be able to articulate and sell the benefits of digital transformation. It's about what enablement would this create, what agility can we have as an organisation.
I mean, 5 years ago, we would do IT projects, and maybe 90% of the resources would sit within IT, and it would be a big development project, and then we would pass it to the business, and it wouldn't quite land. Now, they're business projects that are digitally enabled, with possibly 60, maybe even more percentage of the resourcing going into business change and capability inside, not in IT, but inside the business. Then the enablement is the rest, and that's the technology. And actually, the technology is often incidental. It doesn't matter. It's about the impact and what you deliver inside the business.
It sounds like IT directorates might need to change. Do you foresee new roles, new capabilities coming from this transformation, Karen?
Certainly cybersecurity, data engineering. There's lots of different capabilities that historically you wouldn't have found in a traditional IT department.
Our cyber teams might have been a half a person's job 5, 6, 7 years ago. Now we've got teams of 5+ people just focused on cybersecurity. There are roles that we're beginning to recruit to now that 5 years ago maybe weren't even described. People that can do machine learning, the data architects. As Karen said, it's a radical change.
And I think that change will extend across our organisation. So HR professionals, administrators, finance people, they will all have a much bigger proportion of digital in their roles than they have before.
Can you tell me about UCISA, just a little bit more about it, who you work with, who you help, who are your members?
UCISA is a fantastic community-led organisation. We have the vast majority of the higher education sector as members in the UK, as well as a number of commercial partners as well. It's about sharing good practice and leading digital change for the sector.
Well, I mean, for those of us that have been working in the sector a long time and have now reached that top table, many would argue, I would for sure, that participating in UCISA and the network and the collaboration that comes with that has been fundamental in achieving that success.
And I think for some it's often a lifeline, you know, when we hit challenges, when we come up against difficulties in our day-to-day roles, there's always the opportunity to reach out and say, you know, we're in the middle of this is happening, has anyone else experienced?
We've covered a lot of ground in our short time here, but what would you say are the 3 key takeaways, or the key takeaways for our audience? Karen?
The CIO has to have a seat at the top table. Has to be there influencing discussion, being able to intertwine the digital strategy with the organisational strategy.
The CIO needs to be able to balance business and technology in a way that everyone can understand.
CIO has to be a strategic partner, and unless you're a member of that C-suite and at the table, that can't happen.
Paul, James, Karen, thank you so much.
Thank you.